The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street of Silver Creek as Abigail Zimmerman felt the bite of rope against her wrists, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. At 20 years old, she never imagined she'd be standing on an auction block in this God-forsaken corner of the Arizona Territory, 1875, with men bidding on her as if she were cattle. $5 silver for the girl, shouted a grizzled miner with tobacco-stained teeth. 7, countered a portly saloon owner, his eyes roaming her figure with undisguised hunger. Abigail fought back tears as she stared at the horizon. 3 weeks ago, she'd been traveling west with her ailing father, their wagon laden with hopes and dreams of a new beginning. Now her father was dead, buried in an unmarked grave, and she was being sold to settle his supposed gambling debts by the ruthless gang that had ambushed them. 8 silver coins, came another voice, rough as sandpaper. The auctioneer, a thin man with rat-like features named Silas Grady, grinned maliciously. 8 silver coins for this fine specimen. Do I hear 9? A hush fell over the crowd as a tall figure emerged from the shadows of the general store. His spurs clinked against the wooden boardwalk, the brim of his hat pulled low over his face. Dust clung to his leather chaps and worn denim, marking him as a man who lived in the saddle. "I'll pay with my life if I must." The words hung in the air, electrifying the crowd. The stranger raised his head, revealing piercing blue eyes beneath the shadow of his hat. He stepped forward, one hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. "The name's Jackson Zane," he announced, his voice carrying across the street. "And this auction ends now." Silas Grady's face contorted with rage. "This ain't your business, cowboy. The girl's father owed a debt, and debts get paid one way or another in Silver Creek." Jackson's expression remained impassive as he took another step forward. "Let her go." "Or what?" Grady sneered, gesturing to the 3 armed men flanking the auction block. "Or you'll find out exactly what I mean by paying with my life," Jackson replied, his voice deadly quiet. "I've got nothing to lose, Grady. Can your men say the same?" Something in Jackson's eyes, a cold, unflinching resolve, made Grady hesitate. The tension stretched like a bowstring pulled taut, ready to snap at any moment. Abigail held her breath, her gaze locked on the mysterious cowboy who had just wagered his life for a woman he'd never met. 20 silver coins, Jackson finally said, reaching into his pocket and tossing a small leather pouch at Grady's feet. "That's more than double your highest bid. Take it and consider the debt paid." Grady's eyes narrowed as he calculated his options. After a tense moment, he bent down to retrieve the pouch, weighing it in his palm before emptying the coins into his hand. "Deal," he said with a yellow-toothed grin, pocketing the silver. "She's yours, cowboy. Hope she's worth dying for." With a nod to his men, Grady ordered Abigail's bonds cut. She stumbled forward on legs weak with fear and relief, uncertain whether to run or stay. The stranger Jackson approached her slowly, as one might a spooked horse. "You all right, miss?" he asked quietly, his voice gentler now. Abigail nodded, though nothing was all right. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Jackson's eyes flickered to the dispersing crowd, then back to her. "Let's get somewhere safe first. Questions later." He guided her toward a dappled gray horse tethered nearby, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. As they rode out of town, Abigail felt the stares of the townsfolk burning into her back. She didn't know if she'd just been saved or condemned to a different kind of hell. The horse carried them away from Silver Creek, kicking up dust as they traveled along a winding trail that led into the foothills. Abigail sat stiffly in front of Jackson, acutely aware of his presence behind her, his arms reaching around her to hold the reins. "My name is Abigail," she finally said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "Abigail Zimmerman." "Jackson Zane," he replied, though she already knew this from his confrontation with Grady. "Most folks call me Jax. Where are you taking me, Mr. Zane?" I've got a small cabin about an hour's ride from here. You'll be safe there while we figure out your next steps. Abigail tensed. My next steps? I assume you have somewhere you're trying to get to. Family waiting? She shook her head, grief threatening to choke her. No. My father was all I had. We were headed to California to start over after my mother died last year. Jackson was quiet for a moment, the only sound the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the creak of saddle leather. I'm sorry about your father, he said finally. What happened? Abigail swallowed hard. We were attacked on the trail. Bandits. They said my father had been in Silver Creek months before and lost at cards to a man named Reeves. Said he owed $100. Her voice broke. My father never gambled a day in his life, Mr. Zane. It was a lie. They killed him when he tried to protect me, then brought me to Silver Creek to settle his debt. Jackson's posture stiffened behind her. Reeves, he muttered. Dirk? Reeves? Yes, Abigail said, surprised. Do you know him? I know of him. He runs with the Blackwater Gang. They control most of the territory between here and the New Mexico border. Robbery, extortion, murder. They do it all, and hide behind false claims of debts owed. Then you know I was being sold based on a lie. I suspected as much, Jackson replied. It's an old trick. They target travelers, especially those who look like they have a little money but not enough to cause too much trouble. Abigail turned slightly in the saddle to look at him. But why did you help me? You could have been killed. For a long moment, Jackson was silent, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Finally, he said, 3 years ago, my sister was traveling west with her husband. They were attacked by bandits, too likely the same gang. Her husband was killed. She was taken. His jaw tightened. I've been looking for her ever since. Did you think I was your sister? Abigail asked softly. He shook his head. No. But every time I see the Blackwater Gang selling someone like cattle, I see her face. I couldn't save her, but maybe I can save someone else. The rest of the journey passed in contemplative silence. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they crested a small rise, revealing a modest cabin nestled among pine trees. A small corral stood empty beside it, and a thin plume of smoke rose from the stone chimney. Someone's there, Abigail said nervously. That's just Alma, Jackson explained. She's an older woman from the Apache tribe who helps look after the place when I'm away. She's trustworthy. He guided the horse toward the cabin, and as they approached, the door opened to reveal a gray-haired woman with weathered skin and alert eyes. She watched them dismount without surprise, as if she'd been expecting their arrival. Jax. She greeted him with a nod, her eyes moving to Abigail with quiet assessment. You bring trouble again. Just a friend who needs shelter, Alma, he replied. The older woman's expression softened slightly. Come. Food is ready. Abigail followed Jackson into the cabin, struck by its simple cleanliness. A central room served as kitchen and living area, with a small bedroom visible through an open door. Herbs hung from the ceiling beams, filling the air with a pleasant, earthy scent. You can have the bedroom, Jackson said, gesturing toward it. I'll sleep out here. I couldn't possibly. Please, he interrupted gently. It's no trouble. Alma placed bowls of stew on the rough-hewn table along with thick slices of bread. Eat, she commanded, then talk. The stew was delicious, rich with tender meat and vegetables Abigail couldn't identify. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She ate ravenously, only slowing when her bowl was nearly empty. Thank you, she said to Alma, who acknowledged the gratitude with a slight inclination of her head. After the meal, Alma left for her own dwelling, which Jackson explained was a small hut just beyond the tree line. The two of them sat in front of the fireplace, the flames casting dancing shadows across the walls. What will happen now? Abigail asked, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Jackson stoked the fire thoughtfully. The Blackwater Gang won't take kindly to what happened today. Grady might have accepted the silver, but Reeves won't be satisfied. They'll come looking for both of us. Fear curled in Abigail's stomach. Because of me, you're in danger. I've been in their sights for years, he replied with a shrug. This changes nothing. But what am I to do? I have nowhere to go. No money, no family. Jackson regarded her thoughtfully. Do you still want to get to California? I don't know, Abigail admitted. That was my father's dream more than mine. He wanted to start a small farm near the coast. Tears pricked at her eyes. I just wanted him to be happy after we lost Mother. I'm heading to Tucson in a few days, Jackson said after a moment. It's a larger town with more opportunities. You could find work there. Maybe save enough to continue west if that's what you decide. Abigail nodded slowly. Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. No need, he said, rising from his chair. Get some rest, Miss Zimmerman. Tomorrow will come soon enough. As Abigail settled into the narrow bed that night, she listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness coyotes calling in the distance, the whisper of wind through pine needles, the occasional creak of the cabin settling. Despite the comfort of a real bed after weeks of sleeping on the ground, sleep eluded her. Her mind replayed the events of the day, the humiliation of standing on that auction block, the cold dread as men bid for her like she was property, and then Jackson Zane's unexpected intervention. I'll pay with my life if I must, he had said. Such dramatic words, yet spoken with such quiet conviction that they sent shivers down her spine even now. Who was this man really? A lone cowboy with a vendetta against a notorious gang, searching for a long-lost sister while risking his life to save strangers. It seemed like something from a dime novel, too heroic to be real. Yet here she was, safe in his cabin instead of being forced into who knows what kind of servitude. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into uneasy dreams filled with faceless bandits and silver coins falling like rain. Morning arrived with golden light filtering through the cabin's single window. Abigail woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of the previous day came rushing back. She dressed quickly in the same travel-worn dress she'd been wearing for days, wishing she had her trunk with its few spare garments. But that, like everything else she owned, had been stolen by the bandits. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Jackson already awake, drinking coffee at the table. He looked up as she entered, and for the first time, she truly saw him in the clear light of day. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps late 20s, with sun-bronzed skin and a strong jawline partially obscured by several days' worth of stubble. His blue eyes, so cold and determined yesterday, now held a certain warmth. "Morning," he greeted her. "Coffee's hot if you want some." Abigail accepted gratefully, wrapping her hands around the tin cup he offered. "Where's Alma?" "She comes and goes," Jackson replied. "Probably checking her traps. She hunts most of what we eat." Abigail sipped her coffee, looking around the cabin with new appreciation. "You've carved out a peaceful life here." A shadow crossed his face. "It's temporary. Just a place to return to between searches." "For your sister," Abigail said softly. He nodded, his expression grim. "Her name is Emily. She's 2 years younger than me, would be 27 now. After our parents died, it was just the two of us. She met a man named Thomas who was heading west to stake a mining claim. They married, and I stayed behind in Missouri to settle our family's affairs. Planned to join them later." His knuckles whitened around his cup. "By the time I got word of what happened and made it out here, the trail was cold." "How do you know she's still alive?" Abigail asked gently. Jackson's gaze met hers, fierce with conviction. "I'd feel it if she weren't." And there have been whispers of a woman matching her description seen with the gang. That's why I've stayed in this region, tracking their movements, disrupting their operations when I can. Like yesterday, Abigail murmured. Like yesterday, he agreed. Though I admit, it was the first time I've directly interfered with one of their public transactions. Usually, I'm more discreet. Something in his tone made Abigail realize that Jackson Zane wasn't simply a cowboy. He was a man waging a personal war against a dangerous enemy, using tactics he wasn't sharing with her. The thought should have frightened her, but strangely, it didn't. "What will we do today?" she asked, changing the subject. "First, we need to get you some proper clothes and supplies," he said, standing and reaching for his hat. "There's a trading post about 5 miles from here. The owner, Henry, is a friend. He'll help us outfit you for the journey to Tucson." "I have no money," Abigail reminded him. Jackson shook his head. "Consider it part of your rescue." "Mr. Zane." "Jax," he corrected her. "And before you protest, Miss Zimmerman, understand that I'm not doing this out of pity. The Blackwater Gang took everything from you because of a lie. Consider this a small righting of that wrong." Abigail wanted to argue but saw the determination in his eyes. "Thank you, Jax. And please, call me Abigail." An hour later, they were on horseback again, this time with Abigail riding a gentle chestnut mare that Jackson kept as a spare mount. The trading post turned out to be a ramshackle building beside a small creek, with faded lettering proclaiming it Henry's Goods and Sundries. Several horses were tied outside, including 2 that bore the markings of the territorial law. Jackson frowned at the sight. "Marshals," he said quietly. "Stay close to me and let me do the talking." Inside, the trading post was crowded with merchandise shelves piled high with canned goods, tools, clothing, and an assortment of housewares. Behind a counter stood a barrel-chested man with an impressive mustache who brightened at the sight of Jackson. "Zane, been wondering when you'd show your face again," he called out. "Henry," Jackson greeted him with a nod. "Need some supplies." His eyes flicked to the 2 men in dusty suits examining rifles on the far wall, badges glinting on their vests. Henry followed his gaze. "Marshals Braddock and Miller," he explained in a lowered voice. "Looking for those Blackwater boys. Word is they hit another stage yesterday near Copper Canyon." Jackson nodded almost imperceptibly, then turned to make introductions. "Henry, this is Miss Abigail Zimmerman. She's in need of traveling clothes and necessities. Her wagon was attacked on the trail." Understanding dawned in Henry's eyes as he looked at Abigail with newfound sympathy. "I'm mighty sorry to hear that, miss. Lost family?" "My father," she replied softly. "Same gang?" Henry asked Jackson quietly. "Yes," came the terse reply. Henry's expression hardened. "Well then, let's get you fixed up proper, miss. Martha," he called toward the back room. "Come help this young lady find some suitable attire." A plump, cheerful woman emerged and immediately took Abigail under her wing, leading her to a corner where women's clothing was displayed. As they browsed through dresses, shirts, and riding skirts, Abigail noticed Jackson engaged in intense conversation with the marshals, his expression grave. "Your man seems concerned," Martha remarked, following Abigail's gaze. "Oh, he's not. We're not," Abigail stammered. Martha's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Whatever you say, dear. Now try this on. Blue suits your complexion." By the time Abigail had selected 2 serviceable dresses, a riding skirt with matching jacket, undergarments, and sturdy boots, the marshals had departed. Jackson was examining a new rifle, his conversation with Henry now revolving around ammunition. "Find everything you need?" he asked when he noticed her approach. "Yes, thank you," she replied, feeling awkward about his generosity. Jackson paid for their purchases, including the rifle, additional ammunition, food supplies, and a bedroll for Abigail without batting an eye at the considerable sum. As Henry wrapped their items, he leaned across the counter. "Those marshals were asking about yesterday's auction in Silver Creek," he said quietly. "Seems someone made quite a scene. They're curious about a tall cowboy who interrupted proceedings." Jackson remained impassive. "Lots of tall cowboys in these parts." "Indeed," Henry agreed with a knowing look. "But not many willing to face down Dirk Reeves's men." "Watch yourself, Zane. They're saying Reeves himself is headed back this way from El Paso." "Appreciate the warning," Jackson replied, gathering their packages. "We'll be moving on soon enough." Outside, as they secured their purchases to the horses, Abigail couldn't contain her questions any longer. "Are the marshals looking for you? Are you wanted?" Jackson finished tightening a strap before answering. "Not officially. The law has little love for the Blackwater Gang, but they don't always approve of my methods either." "Which are?" He gave her a measured look. "Sometimes justice needs a helping hand when the law is spread too thin across the territory." "You're a vigilante," she said, realization dawning. "I prefer to think of myself as an interested party with personal stakes." He mounted his horse in one fluid motion. "The marshals know who I am, but as long as I only target those who deserve it, they tend to look the other way." Abigail climbed onto her mare, processing this new information. The man who had saved her walked a fine line between lawman and outlaw, driven by a mission that consumed him. It should have made her wary, yet she found herself drawn to his unwavering sense of purpose. They rode in companionable silence back to the cabin, arriving to find Alma skinning a rabbit outside. The older woman nodded approvingly at Abigail's new attire, which she had changed into at the trading post. "Good. Now you look like woman who can ride," she commented. Abigail couldn't help but smile. "Thank you, I think." That evening, as they shared a meal of rabbit stew, Jackson announced their plans. "We'll leave for Tucson day after tomorrow. It's a 4-day ride if the weather holds. Alma will stay here in case." He trailed off, but Abigail understood. In case his sister somehow found her way to the cabin in his absence. "I will keep watch," Alma confirmed. "And if Blackwater men come, I will send smoke signals to warn you." Abigail realized how coordinated their system was. This wasn't the first time Jackson had rescued someone from the gang's clutches. "How many others have you helped?" she asked. Jackson paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. 17, he replied after a moment. Most were women and children taken during raids. A few were men being held for ransom. "And none of them were your sister," Abigail said softly. "No." The word was heavy with years of disappointment. "But each one knew something, saw something that helped me piece together the gang's operations, their hideouts, their routes, their contacts in different towns." "You're mapping their entire network," Abigail realized. Jackson nodded. "Slowly. They're careful, always moving, changing patterns. But eventually, I'll find her." Alma placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. "And when you do, you will need to be ready for what you find," she said cryptically before rising to take her leave for the night. The following day was spent in preparation for their journey. Jackson taught Abigail how to care for her horse, how to check the saddle for proper fit, and basic shooting skills using the new rifle. She proved a quick study, hitting her target, a tin can placed on a fence post after only a few attempts. "My father taught me to shoot a small pistol when I was younger," she explained. "He said a woman alone needed to know how to protect herself." He was right, Jackson agreed, watching her reload with growing confidence. "Though I hope you never need to use those skills." As the sun began to set, they retreated to the cabin for their last night before the journey. Jackson spread a map across the table, tracing their planned route with his finger. "We'll follow the river south for the first day, then cut west through Apache Pass," he explained. "It's the shortest route, but not without risks." The pass can be a good place for ambushes. By the Blackwater Gang? By anyone looking for easy pickings, he replied. But we'll be careful. Travel by day, make small camps at night. Abigail studied the map, noting the vast empty spaces between settlements. It looks so wild. It is, Jackson confirmed. Beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. But there's freedom in that wilderness that you won't find back east. Is that why you came west? For freedom? He shook his head. I came for Emily, but I've stayed because... He paused, searching for words. Because out here, a man is judged by his actions, not his name or his history. You can reinvent yourself, become who you were meant to be. And who were you meant to be, Jackson Zane? Abigail asked softly. His eyes met hers across the table, something vulnerable flickering in their blue depths. I'm still figuring that out. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Jackson cleared his throat and rolled up the map. We should get some rest. Dawn comes early. Abigail nodded, retreating to the bedroom with a strange flutter in her chest. As she prepared for bed, she caught herself wondering what it might be like to stay here, in this peaceful cabin with its taciturn owner who risked his life for strangers and spoke of freedom and reinvention. But such thoughts were foolish. Jackson was consumed by his search for Emily, and Abigail had her own life to rebuild. Still, as she drifted off to sleep, she couldn't help but imagine what might have been under different circumstances. They set out at first light, the eastern sky painted in brilliant streaks of pink and gold. Alma stood in the cabin doorway, raising a hand in solemn farewell as they rode away. Abigail found herself surprisingly comfortable in the saddle, the riding skirt Martha had recommended allowing for ease of movement while maintaining propriety. Jackson rode slightly ahead, his posture alert, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. They followed game trails and shallow creek beds, avoiding the main roads where they might be more easily spotted. The gang has informants in most towns, Jackson explained during a brief rest, eyes watching for travelers, especially those who might have valuables or could fetch a good price. Like me, Abigail said grimly. Yes, he acknowledged. Young women are particularly valuable to them for ransom if they have wealthy families, or for sale to certain establishments if they don't. Abigail shuddered, knowing how close she had come to such a fate. And your sister? Do you think they've kept her all this time? Pain flashed across Jackson's features. I don't know, but Emily's smart and strong-willed. If anyone could survive in their midst, it's her. They continued riding, the landscape gradually changing as they descended into a valley. By midday, the heat had become oppressive, the sun beating down mercilessly from a cloudless sky. Abigail's new clothes were soon damp with sweat, and dust coated her throat despite the bandana she wore over her nose and mouth. There's a spring about a mile ahead, Jackson said, noticing her discomfort. We can rest there until the worst of the heat passes. The spring turned out to be a small oasis, a pool of clear water surrounded by cottonwood trees that provided blessed shade. They watered the horses and refilled their canteens before settling beneath the largest tree to eat a simple lunch of jerky, dried fruit, and hardtack. How did you become so familiar with this territory? Abigail asked, leaning back against the tree trunk with a sigh of relief. 3 years of searching, Jackson replied, removing his hat to wipe sweat from his brow. I've crossed every creek, climbed every ridge between the Colorado River and the New Mexico line. After a while, you develop a sense for the land where water might be found, which passes are safe in winter, which valleys harbor predators. Human or animal? Abigail asked wryly. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Both. They fell into comfortable silence, listening to the gentle rustling of leaves overhead and the occasional call of a distant bird. Abigail found herself studying Jackson's profile, the straight nose, the determined set of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. He was undeniably handsome, but it was his quiet intensity that drew her, the sense of purpose that drove his every action. "You're staring," he said without looking at her. Abigail blushed. "I was just wondering, if you find your sister and bring the Blackwater Gang to justice, what then? What will you do with your life?" Jackson seemed startled by the question, as if he'd never considered a future beyond his current mission. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe buy some land, raise horses. I was studying to be a veterinarian back in Missouri before." He shrugged. "Different lifetime now." "It doesn't have to be," Abigail said gently. "When this is over, you could go back to that path." He turned to look at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Some paths, once abandoned, can't be reclaimed." Before Abigail could respond, Jackson suddenly tensed, his hand moving to his sidearm. "Someone's coming," he whispered, rising to his feet in one fluid motion. "Stay behind me." Moments later, Abigail heard it too, the sound of approaching horses, at least 3 or 4 from the sound of it. Jackson moved to the edge of their small grove, his posture alert, but not overtly threatening. 4 riders appeared around a bend in the trail, 3 men and a woman, all wearing trail dust and expressions of caution. The leader, a gray-haired man with a weathered face, raised his hand in greeting. "Ho there," he called. "Mind if we water our horses?" Jackson assessed them for a moment before nodding. "Spring's big enough to share." The riders approached slowly, and Abigail could now see they were a family: the older man, a woman who appeared to be his wife, and 2 younger men who bore a strong resemblance to them, likely sons. "Obliged," the older man said as they dismounted. "Name's Samuel Parker. This is my wife Martha and our boys James and William, heading to Tucson from Santa Fe." "Jackson Zane," Jax replied with a nod, "and Miss Abigail Zimmerman, also bound for Tucson." Introductions made, the newcomers led their horses to the spring. Martha Parker, a kindly-faced woman in her 50s, approached Abigail with a warm smile. "It's nice to see another woman on the trail," she said. "We've been traveling for 2 weeks, and I'm desperate for conversation that doesn't revolve around cattle prices." Abigail laughed, finding herself instantly liking the older woman. "I can imagine. We've only been on the trail a day, and already I miss female company." As the horses drank and the men discussed the condition of the trail ahead, Martha shared some freshly baked cornbread from their supplies, which Abigail gratefully accepted. "You two make a handsome couple," Martha remarked, watching Jackson in conversation with Samuel and the boys. "Oh, we're not," Abigail began, then stopped, unsure how to explain their complicated relationship. "Mr. Zane is helping me reach Tucson safely after I lost my father on the trail." Martha's expression softened with sympathy. "I'm sorry for your loss, dear. The Western Territories can be unforgiving. You're fortunate to have found a protector." Abigail nodded, though protector seemed an inadequate word for what Jackson had become to her in their short acquaintance. Savior, perhaps, or ally, or something else entirely that she wasn't ready to name. After a short rest, both parties prepared to continue their journeys. Samuel Parker approached Jackson with a proposition. "We're heading the same way," he said. "Might be safer to travel together, at least until we reach Apache Pass. Safety in numbers and all that." Jackson hesitated, his eyes briefly meeting Abigail's before he nodded. "Makes sense. We can make camp together tonight and reassess in the morning." And so their small party became 7, traveling south along the increasingly rugged terrain. Abigail found herself riding beside Martha, the 2 women exchanging stories of their lives before coming west. The Parker family was relocating to Tucson to open a mercantile, having sold their business in Santa Fe after years of struggle. "The railroad's coming to Tucson," Martha explained. Samuel says it'll bring prosperity like we haven't seen before. More settlers, more trade. A good place for a fresh start. That's what I'm hoping for as well, Abigail confided. A fresh start. By evening, they had made good progress, reaching a small plateau that offered a defensible position for their camp. The men took care of the horses while Martha and Abigail prepared a simple but hearty meal of beans, bacon, and the last of Martha's cornbread. As they sat around the campfire after dinner, Samuel entertaining them with stories of his youth in Kentucky, Abigail noticed Jackson sitting slightly apart from the group, his attention focused on the darkening landscape beyond their circle of light. Excusing herself, she joined him at his solitary post. Everything all right? He nodded without looking at her. Just being cautious. The Parkers seem like good people, but it pays to stay alert. You don't trust them? She asked, surprised. I trust that they are who they say they are, he replied. But they're making a lot of noise, and noise attracts attention. We're still in territory where the Blackwater Gang operates. Abigail considered this. Would they attack such a large group? If the prize was worth it. His eyes finally met hers, their blue depths serious in the fading light. They know what you look like, Abigail. And they know I interfered with their business. That makes both of us valuable targets. A chill ran down her spine despite the warmth of the evening. Should we separate from the Parkers? I wouldn't want to put them in danger because of me. Jackson's expression softened slightly. No. Parker's right about safety in numbers. And they've chosen this path knowing the risks of the territory. I just think we should take turns keeping watch tonight. I'll help, she offered immediately. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. I'll wake you for the pre-dawn shift. Get some rest until then. Abigail returned to the campfire, where Martha was spreading blankets for the night. The older woman gave her a knowing look that Abigail pretended not to notice, focusing instead on preparing her own bedroll. As the others settled in for the night, Jackson took the first watch, his silhouette visible against the star-filled sky. Abigail watched him until her eyelids grew heavy, wondering about the life he had left behind and the man he might have been, might still become once his quest for justice was complete. True to his word, Jackson gently woke her before dawn. Your turn, he whispered, careful not to disturb the others. Just watch the eastern approach and listen for anything unusual. Wake me if you have any concerns. Abigail nodded, taking the rifle he offered her and moving to the spot he had occupied. The pre-dawn world was eerily quiet, the landscape bathed in silver moonlight that transformed familiar shapes into ghostly silhouettes. She wrapped her jacket tighter around herself against the chill, her senses alert for any sign of movement. As she kept her vigil, Abigail reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few days. From the terror of the auction block to this moment of quiet responsibility, protecting those who slept trustingly nearby. She thought of her father and the future they had planned together in California, a future now forever altered by violence and loss. Yet amid that loss, something unexpected had emerged, a new kind of strength she hadn't known she possessed, and a connection with Jackson Zane that defied easy categorization. He had saved her life, yes, but in the days since, they had become something more than rescuer and rescued. Partners, perhaps, each carrying their own burdens while helping shoulder the others. The first hints of dawn were lightening the eastern sky when Abigail heard the distant sound of hoofbeats, approaching rapidly from the south. She hesitated only a moment before moving quickly to Jackson's side, touching his shoulder lightly. He was instantly awake, hand reaching for his pistol before his eyes even opened. Riders? He asked, reading her expression. From the south, she confirmed, moving fast. Jackson was on his feet in seconds, waking Samuel Parker with a low warning. Within moments, the entire camp was alert, the men positioning themselves strategically while Martha joined Abigail behind a large boulder. Could be nothing. Samuel said quietly. Couriers sometimes travel these trails. Before dawn? Jackson countered, checking his rifle. Not likely. The hoofbeats grew louder, and soon they could make out 5 riders approaching at a gallop. As the group drew nearer, Jackson's expression hardened. Blackwater men, he murmured to Abigail. The one in front is Silas Grady. Abigail felt her blood turn cold at the name of the auctioneer who had tried to sell her. They found us. Stay down, Jackson ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. The riders slowed as they approached the camp, spreading out in a semicircle just beyond rifle range. Grady raised his hand, bringing his companions to a halt. Zane, he called out. I know you're there. We just want the girl. Hand her over, and the rest of you can ride away. Samuel Parker looked questioningly at Jackson, who briefly explained the situation in low tones. The older man's expression hardened. My family doesn't abandon people to predators, he said firmly, positioning himself beside Jackson with his rifle ready. His sons joined them, forming a protective line between the women and the Blackwater men. Abigail, however, felt sick at the thought of these good people risking their lives for her. I should go with them, she whispered to Martha. I can't bear the thought of your family being hurt because of me. Martha gripped her arm fiercely. Nonsense, child. Those men are devils. Samuel and our boys have faced worse than this in their time. Outside, Grady was growing impatient. Last chance, Zane. Reeves wants the girl in your head. But I'm feeling generous. Give us the girl, and you can try to outrun us. Jackson's reply was a single rifle shot that kicked up dust at the feet of Grady's horse, causing the animal to rear in panic. That's your answer, Grady, he shouted. Tell Reeves if he wants either of us, he'll have to come himself. The standoff lasted only moments before Grady signaled his men to retreat. They withdrew slowly, keeping their eyes on the camp as they backed their horses away. This ain't over, Zane, Grady called as a parting shot. Reeves is offering $50 for your head now. When the riders had disappeared from view, everyone in the camp released a collective breath. Jackson turned to the Parkers with a grim expression. You should continue without us, he said. They're not after you, and I won't risk your family getting caught in the crossfire. Samuel shook his head stubbornly. We started this journey together. We'll finish it together. Besides, they'll think twice about attacking 7 armed travelers versus 2. They'll be back with more men, Jackson warned. Then we'd best make good time today, Samuel replied pragmatically. Apache Pass is less than a day's ride. Once through it, we're closer to civilization and the territory of law. Jackson looked as if he wanted to argue further, but instead gave a curt nod of acceptance. They broke camp quickly, eager to put distance between themselves and the Blackwater men. As they rode, Abigail found herself beside Jackson, their horses matching pace along the narrow trail. I'm sorry, she said quietly. You saved me from them once, and now they're hunting you too. He glanced at her, his expression softening slightly. Don't apologize for their evil, Abigail. That's not on you. Still, she persisted, you could have had a peaceful existence in your cabin if not for me. A humorless laugh escaped him. Peace hasn't been part of my life since Emily was taken, and I chose to intervene at that auction. No one forced my hand. They rode in silence for a while before Abigail asked, Would you really have paid with your life? Back in Silver Creek, I mean. Jackson considered the question, his eyes on the horizon. Yes, he finally said, his voice low. Some things are worth dying for. Freedom. Justice. His gaze briefly met hers. The lives of innocent people. Something in the way he looked at her made Abigail's heart flutter strangely, and she quickly returned her attention to the trail ahead. The day passed without further incident, though they maintained a grueling pace that left little time for conversation. By late afternoon, they reached the entrance to Apache Pass, a narrow corridor between towering cliffs that stretched for nearly 10 miles. It was the most direct route to Tucson, but also notorious for ambushes due to its confined space and limited escape routes. "We should make camp and cross at first light," Samuel suggested as they surveyed the pass entrance. "Traveling through there in the dark is asking for trouble." Jackson nodded in agreement, though Abigail could see tension in every line of his body. They established camp in a defensible position with clear sightlines in all directions, taking turns at watch throughout the night. During her shift, Abigail found herself joined by Jackson, who claimed he couldn't sleep. They sat side by side beneath a blanket of stars, their shoulders nearly touching. "Tell me about Missouri," she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "What was your life like there?" Jackson was quiet for so long that Abigail thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and nostalgic. "We had a small farm outside St. Louis. Nothing fancy, just enough land to grow what we needed and raise a few horses. My father was a teacher at the local school. Mother kept the house and taught Emily and me at home until we were old enough for formal education." "It sounds lovely," Abigail said, trying to imagine a younger Jackson in such a peaceful setting. "It was," he agreed. "Simple but good. After Father died, I stayed to help Mother with the farm. Started studying veterinary medicine with the local doctor. Had plans to open a practice someday." His voice grew softer. "Then Mother passed too. And Emily married Thomas. They were heading west for a fresh start, and I was supposed to join them after settling the estate." "I'm sorry," Abigail murmured, understanding all too well the pain of lost dreams and family. Jackson shrugged, his shoulder brushing against hers with the movement. "Life rarely follows the paths we plan. What about you? What was your life before all this?" Abigail smiled sadly. "Not so different from yours, really. My mother was from Philadelphia, educated, refined. She married my father against her family's wishes because he was just a shopkeeper. They disowned her, so we made our own way in a small town in Ohio. Father ran the general store, and Mother taught me literature and music." Her voice caught. "She died last winter consumption. Father couldn't bear to stay where everything reminded him of her. So he sold the store, and we set out for California." "To start over," Jackson said, understanding in his voice. "Yes." Abigail blinked back tears. "Now I'm not sure what I'm starting or where. Just that I must go on somehow." Without warning, Jackson's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with gentle strength. "You will find your way, Abigail Zimmerman. You're stronger than you know." The simple touch and his words of confidence sent warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the night air. They sat together in companionable silence until the sky began to lighten, neither mentioning their joined hands nor making any move to separate. With dawn came preparations to traverse Apache Pass. The party moved in tight formation, Samuel and his older son in the lead, Jackson and William Parker flanking the sides, and Abigail and Martha protected in the center. They entered the pass cautiously, everyone alert for signs of danger. The towering rock walls rose hundreds of feet on either side, creating a natural corridor that wound through the mountains. In places, the path narrowed to barely 15 feet wide, forcing them to ride single file. The air was cooler here, trapped between the cliffs, and eerily quiet save for the echo of their horses' hooves. They had traveled perhaps halfway through the pass when Jackson suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. "Listen," he whispered. At first, Abigail heard nothing beyond the normal sounds of their party. Then it came the faint clatter of stones falling from somewhere above them. "Riders?" Samuel asked quietly. Jackson shook his head. "No. Someone's on the ridge." He pointed upward to where the cliff face met the sky. As if confirming his suspicion, a small avalanche of pebbles cascaded down the wall to their right, followed by what sounded like a muffled curse. "Ambush," Jackson said grimly. "They're positioning themselves above us." Samuel glanced around at the narrow confines of the pass. No cover, no retreat without being seen. Only one thing for it, Jackson decided. We ride hard and fast, stay together, and don't stop for anything. Before anyone could respond, a shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off the rock near William Parker's head. Instantly, the party spurred their horses forward, racing along the twisting path as more shots echoed through the canyon. Abigail clung to her horse's mane, her heart pounding in her ears as they galloped through the pass. Behind her, she could hear the thunder of pursuing hoofbeats, the ambushers who had been waiting within the pass itself. Jackson rode beside her, occasionally turning in his saddle to fire at their pursuers. Ahead, the pass began to widen, offering hope of escape into more open terrain, where they might outrun or outmaneuver their attackers. They had almost reached the wider section when disaster struck. Martha Parker's horse stepped into a depression in the rocky ground, stumbling badly and throwing its rider. The older woman cried out as she hit the ground hard, clutching her leg in pain. Samuel wheeled his horse around immediately, as did his sons, providing covering fire as Jackson dismounted to help Martha. Abigail slid from her saddle as well, running to the injured woman's side. "My ankle," Martha gasped, her face white with pain. "I think it's broken." Jackson assessed the situation quickly. Their pursuers, at least 6 riders, were closing in, temporarily held at bay only by the Parkers' rifle fire. "Samuel," he called, "get your wife on my horse. Abigail will ride with me on hers." The older man didn't argue, helping Jackson lift Martha onto the more docile gray horse while Abigail held the reins of her chestnut mare. Once Martha was secured, Samuel mounted behind her, supporting his wife as they prepared to continue. "Go," Jackson ordered, firing his pistol at the approaching riders. "We'll be right behind you." The Parkers hesitated only briefly before spurring their horses forward, leaving Jackson and Abigail momentarily behind. Jackson turned to her, holstering his pistol. "Can you shoot while riding?" he asked urgently. I think so," she replied, remembering her father's lessons. "Good." He handed her his rifle. "You'll have to. I'll steer. You shoot, but only if they get too close." Without further discussion, he swung up onto her mare, reaching down to pull Abigail up behind him. She settled against his back, one arm wrapped around his waist while the other held the rifle awkwardly across her lap. They galloped after the Parkers, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. The pass widened further, finally opening into a broad valley dotted with scrub brush and occasional stands of trees. "There," Jackson called, pointing to where the Parkers had taken cover behind a cluster of boulders about 200 yards ahead. "We'll make our stand there." Abigail glanced over her shoulder to see 4 riders emerging from the pass, their faces hidden beneath bandanas, rifles raised. "They're gaining on us," she cried. "Just a little further," Jackson urged, pushing their horse to its limits. They were 50 yards from the boulders when the first shot whizzed past Abigail's ear. Without thinking, she twisted in the saddle, raised the rifle to her shoulder, and fired. Her shot went wide, but it caused the pursuers to scatter slightly, buying precious seconds. Jackson guided their horse behind the boulders, helping Abigail dismount before taking position beside Samuel and his sons. 4 riders, he reported, but there could be more still in the pass. "We've got decent cover here," Samuel assessed, "and a good field of fire. If we're careful with our ammunition, we can hold them off." Martha, propped against a rock with her injured leg stretched before her, managed a tight smile. "I'm sorry to slow you all down." "Nonsense," Abigail replied, kneeling beside her to examine the ankle, which was already swelling visibly. "We wouldn't leave you." The approaching riders had slowed, realizing their quarry was now well positioned for defense. They stopped just beyond effective rifle range, apparently discussing their options. "I recognize the one on the right," Jackson said grimly. "That's Ned Cooper, one of Reeves's lieutenants. If he's here, this isn't just a random attack." "They followed us from yesterday," Samuel surmised. "Or had men watching the pass," knowing we'd likely come this way, Jackson replied. Either way, they want Abigail badly. Abigail felt cold despite the morning sun. And you, she reminded him. $50 for your head, remember? Jackson's mouth quirked in a humorless smile. Nice to know I'm worth something. A tense standoff ensued, neither side willing to make the first move. The Blackwater men occasionally fired shots that fell short or went wide, seemingly testing the defenders' positions rather than seriously attempting to hit them. They're waiting for something, Jackson muttered after nearly an hour of this stalemate. Or someone. As if summoned by his words, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon behind the Blackwater men. More riders were approaching, at least a dozen from what they could see. We're in trouble now, William Parker said, counting their remaining ammunition. We can't hold off that many for long. Jackson's expression was grim as he studied the approaching riders. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Those aren't Blackwater men, he said with evident relief. How can you tell? Abigail asked, straining to see the distant figures. The dust pattern, he explained. Blackwater rides in a tight formation. Those riders are spread out, military style. He stood, waving his hat above the boulder. It's the marshals. Sure enough, as the riders drew closer, Abigail could make out the glint of badges. The Blackwater men, realizing they were about to be caught between two forces, quickly wheeled their horses and galloped back toward the pass. They're running, Samuel exclaimed. Let them go, Jackson advised. The marshals will pursue them into the pass. It's a dead end if they've got men covering both sides. Within minutes, the marshals' party reached their position, led by the same two men Abigail had seen at Henry's trading post. Marshal Braddock, a tall man with a weathered face and impressive mustache, dismounted first. Zane. He greeted Jackson with a nod that suggested both respect and wariness. Thought that might be you causing trouble again. Not causing it this time, Braddock. Just caught in it. Jackson quickly introduced the Parkers and Abigail, explaining their situation. Miss Zimmerman was being sold at auction in Silver Creek, he concluded. I intervened, and now Reeves wants both our heads. Braddock's expression darkened. Human trafficking. That's a hanging offense, even out here. He turned to one of his deputies. Johnson, escort these folks to Tucson. The rest of you, we're going after those Blackwater boys. While the marshals prepared to pursue the gang members, Deputy Johnson examined Martha's ankle. Doesn't look broken, madam, but it's a bad sprain. You'll need a doctor once we reach town. With the immediate danger past, they reorganized their party for the final leg to Tucson. Martha was made comfortable on a makeshift stretcher suspended between two horses, and they set out at a more measured pace, the deputy leading the way. As they traveled, Abigail found herself riding beside Jackson once more. It seems we're always being rescued at the last moment, she observed. Luck has a way of finding those who need it most, he replied, though his expression remained troubled. But we can't count on it forever. Will you continue your search for Emily once we reach Tucson? She asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it nonetheless. Jackson nodded. Braddock might have some information. The marshals keep track of the gang's movements even if they can't always catch them. And what about me? Abigail asked softly. Once we reach Tucson, what happens then? He looked at her, something unreadable in his blue eyes. That depends on what you want, Abigail. Tucson's a growing town with opportunities. You could find work, build a new life. Is that what you want for me? She pressed, needing more than vague assurances. Jackson's gaze returned to the trail ahead. What I want doesn't matter. You deserve freedom to choose your own path, not have it chosen for you whether by the Blackwater Gang or by me. Abigail fell silent, both touched by his concern for her autonomy and frustrated by his evasion. The man who had boldly declared he would pay with his life to save her now seemed unable to admit what he wanted for their future, if indeed he saw any future that included them both. They reached Tucson as the sun was setting, the town's buildings glowing golden in the fading light. It was larger than Abigail had expected, a proper town with businesses, churches, and homes spreading outward from a central plaza. The railroad had indeed brought prosperity, evident in the new construction visible on the outskirts. Deputy Johnson guided them to the town's main hotel, where rooms were secured for the night. A doctor was summoned for Martha, confirming that her ankle was badly sprained but not broken. The Parker family, grateful for the assistance that had brought them safely to their destination, invited Abigail and Jackson to dine with them once Martha was comfortable. "We owe you both our lives," Samuel said earnestly over a hearty meal in the hotel's dining room. "If there's ever anything we can do to repay you, you need only ask." "Actually," Abigail ventured, "I'll be looking for work now that I'm here. Any suggestions would be welcome." "Well now," Martha said, her eyes brightening despite her pain, "we'll be opening our mercantile within the month. We could certainly use a well-spoken young lady to help with the accounts and assist female customers." "That's very kind," Abigail began, but Martha waved away her thanks. "It's not kindness, it's good business. A woman who can shoot straight while riding horseback and still maintain her composure is exactly the kind of assistant we need in this town." The offer was a godsend, providing not only employment but also a connection to people Abigail had come to respect and trust. She accepted gratefully, relief washing over her at the thought of having a place to belong, however tenuous. Throughout the meal, she was acutely aware of Jackson's silence. He participated in the conversation when addressed but seemed preoccupied, his attention often drifting to the window overlooking the street. When they finally bid the Parkers good night and retreated to their separate rooms, Abigail found herself standing awkwardly in the hallway with Jackson, neither quite ready to part ways. "So," she said, breaking the silence, "it seems I have a position with the Parkers." "Good people," he agreed. "You'll do well with them." "And you?" she asked, unable to keep the edge of uncertainty from her voice. "What will you do now?" Jackson hesitated, his hand resting on the doorknob to his room. "Braddock's men captured 2 of the Blackwater riders. I'll speak with them tomorrow, see if they know anything about Emily." "And then?" Abigail persisted, stepping closer to him. His eyes met hers, conflict evident in their depths. "And then I'll keep searching, Abigail. I can't stop until I find her." "I understand," she said softly, though her heart ached at the thought of him riding away. "But must you search alone? Is there no room in your quest for companionship?" Jackson's expression softened, his free hand rising to brush a strand of hair from her face. The gentle touch sent warmth cascading through her. "You deserve better than a man consumed by vengeance," he said quietly. "Better than someone who might not return from the next confrontation." "Shouldn't that be my choice?" Abigail countered, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "You said I deserve freedom to choose my own path. What if that path includes you, Jackson Zane?" For a long moment he seemed unable to respond, the conflict within him visible in every line of his face. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, he cupped her cheek in his palm. "I don't know what the future holds," he admitted. "But I do know that meeting you has reminded me of who I was before rage and grief consumed me, of who I might be again someday." "Is that enough?" she whispered, leaning almost imperceptibly into his touch. "It has to be," he replied, "for now." With that, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. Then he released her and opened his door, pausing only briefly to add, "Good night, Abigail. Sleep well." She stood in the hallway long after his door closed, her fingers touching the spot where his lips had been, wondering if that gentle kiss was a promise or a farewell. The following morning, Abigail woke early, determined to find Jackson before he disappeared on his quest. She dressed quickly in one of her new dresses and made her way downstairs, only to find the hotel lobby bustling with activity. A group of marshals had gathered, including Braddock, who nodded to her in recognition. "Miss Zimmerman," he greeted her. "Looking for Zane? He's at the marshal's office, questioning those Blackwater boys we caught yesterday." "Thank you," she replied, relieved to know Jackson hadn't left town yet. "May I ask what they've told you?" Braddock's expression turned grim. "Not much. Loyal to Reeves, or more likely scared of him. But Zane has a way of getting people to talk, especially when it comes to his sister." Abigail made her way to the marshal's office, a solid brick building on the town's main street. Inside, she found Jackson sitting across from a manacled man whose face bore the evidence of recent violence, a split lip and bruised jaw. Jackson looked up at her entrance, surprise flickering across his features. "Abigail, you shouldn't be here. I wanted to see you before—" She trailed off, gesturing vaguely. "Before you left." The prisoner glanced between them with calculating eyes. Well, Zane's got himself a woman. Reeves would be mighty interested to know that." Jackson's expression hardened. "Shut your mouth, Cooper, or I'll shut it for you." He turned to Abigail. "Wait outside, please." Though reluctant, she nodded and stepped out onto the boardwalk. The morning sun was already hot, promising another scorching day. She paced back and forth, nodding politely to passers-by, until finally, nearly an hour later, Jackson emerged from the office. His face was drawn, his eyes troubled, but there was a new energy in his movements. "He talked," he said, without preamble. "Cooper. He knows where Emily is?" Abigail's heart leaped. "Where?" "A place called Eagle's Nest. It's a hideout in the Dragoon Mountains, about 2 days' ride from here. Reeves keeps his most valuable possessions there." The word possessions came out with such venom that Abigail flinched. "You're going after her," she said. It wasn't a question. "I have to." His eyes met hers, pleading for understanding. "Cooper says she's alive, Abigail. Alive and working as Reeves's personal cook and housekeeper. She's been there all this time, less than 100 miles from where I've been searching." "I understand," Abigail said, and she did. If there had been any chance of finding her father alive, she would have moved heaven and earth to do so. "When do you leave?" "Now. Braddock's gathering a posse. We ride within the hour." Jackson hesitated, then reached out to take her hands in his. "I want you to stay here, where it's safe. The Parkers will look after you." Abigail nodded, fighting back tears. "Will you come back? After you find Emily?" The question hung between them, weighted with all the unspoken feelings that had grown during their short but intense acquaintance. "Yes," he said finally, his voice firm with conviction. "I'll come back, Abigail. That's a promise." Before she could respond, he pulled her into an embrace, his arms strong around her. Abigail clung to him, memorizing the feel of him, the scent of leather and open prairie that seemed to cling to his clothes. "Be careful," she whispered against his chest. "Please be careful." Jackson pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. Then, with a decisiveness that took her breath away, he lowered his head and kissed her. Unlike the gentle kiss on her forehead the night before, this was a kiss of passion and promise, his lips moving against hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "That's something to come back for," he murmured. And then he was gone, striding toward the livery where Braddock and his men were gathering. Abigail watched him go, her fingers pressed to her lips, hope and fear warring within her heart. The days that followed were a strange mixture of activity and waiting. Abigail moved into a small room above the building the Parkers had rented for their mercantile, helping them prepare for their grand opening. The work was gratifying, giving her purpose and distraction from her worries about Jackson. She threw herself into organizing inventory, setting up displays, and writing advertisements for the local newspaper. Martha, still hobbling on her injured ankle but improving daily, became a dear friend, offering motherly advice and companionship that helped ease the ache of recent losses. "He'll come back," Martha assured her one evening as they sat on the small balcony outside Abigail's room, watching the sunset paint the town in hues of gold and crimson. "I've seen the way that man looks at you, like you're water in the desert." Abigail smiled, grateful for the reassurance even as doubt gnawed at her. If they find his sister, his quest will be over. He might want to take her back east, start over where they have roots. Martha shook her head. "Some men are born to the frontier, Abigail. Your Jackson is one of them. The East would suffocate him now." "He's not my Jackson," Abigail protested, though her cheeks warmed at the thought. "Not yet," Martha replied with a knowing smile. "But he will be." A week passed with no word from the posse. The Parkers' mercantile opened to considerable success, Tucson's residents eager to explore the new establishment and its diverse offerings. Abigail found herself too busy during the days to dwell on her worries, but nights were different. Alone in her room, she would replay that final kiss, wondering if it had been a beginning or an end. On the 10th day after Jackson's departure, Abigail was arranging a display of ladies' gloves when the bell above the store door jingled. She looked up, her practiced smile of greeting freezing on her face at the sight of Marshal Braddock, his expression grim and his clothes travel-stained. "Miss Zimmerman," he said, removing his hat. "Might I have a word?" Abigail's heart plummeted as Samuel quickly stepped forward to take over the display. She followed Braddock to a quiet corner of the store, her hands trembling slightly. "Is he?" She couldn't bring herself to finish the question. Braddock's face softened. "Zane's alive, miss, but he's been shot. Doc's tending to him now at his surgery." Relief and fresh fear warred within her. "How bad is it?" "Took a bullet to the shoulder, lost a fair amount of blood, but Doc Rivers is the best in the territory. Says Zane's young and strong should pull through with proper care." "And his sister? Did you find Emily?" A weary smile broke through Braddock's serious demeanor. "We found her. She's at the hotel now, resting. Bit malnourished and worked half to death, but otherwise unharmed. She's been asking for her brother." "And Reeves?" Abigail couldn't help but ask. Braddock's expression darkened. "Dead. Zane got him with his last shot before going down himself. Most of the gang's either dead or in custody. The Blackwater Gang is finished." Abigail excused herself from the store, promising the Parkers she would return as soon as possible, and hurried to the doctor's surgery. The building was small but well-maintained, with a waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and medicinal herbs. A harried-looking nurse directed her to a room at the back, where she found Jackson lying on a narrow bed, his upper body bandaged, his face pale but peaceful in sleep. A woman sat beside him, slender, with the same striking blue eyes as Jackson, though hers were shadowed with years of hardship. She looked up at Abigail's entrance, wariness immediately apparent in her posture. "Who are you?" "Abigail Zimmerman," she replied, stepping hesitantly into the room. "I'm a friend of Jackson's." The wariness in the woman's expression gave way to curiosity. "Emily Zane," she introduced herself. "Though it's been so long since anyone called me that, it almost sounds strange." She studied Abigail with penetrating eyes. "How do you know my brother?" "He saved my life," Abigail said simply. "I was being sold at auction by the Blackwater Gang. Your brother intervened and helped me reach Tucson safely." Understanding dawned in Emily's eyes. That sounds like Jack's, always the hero. She looked down at her sleeping brother with a mixture of exasperation and profound love. Even as a child, he was always rescuing things: wounded birds, stray dogs. Drove our mother to distraction. Abigail moved to the opposite side of the bed, her eyes taking in Jackson's features, softened in sleep, yet still bearing the marks of recent struggles. The marshal says he'll recover. Yes, Emily confirmed. The bullet went clean through his shoulder. No major damage, just blood loss and exhaustion. Doc says he needs rest, then he'll be good as new. She paused, studying Abigail with renewed interest. You care for him. It wasn't a question, but Abigail answered anyway. Yes, very much. Emily nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. He mentioned you. In his fever, before the doctor gave him laudanum. He was worried about you, making me promise to tell you he kept his word he came back. Tears pricked at Abigail's eyes. He did promise. They sat in companionable silence for a while. The only sounds Jackson's steady breathing and the occasional muffled noises from the street outside. Finally, Emily spoke again. What will you do now? Now that Reeves is dead and the gang broken? It was the question Abigail had been asking herself since Braddock brought the news. I have a position at Parker's Mercantile, she replied. It's good work with kind people. Beyond that. She trailed off, her future as uncertain as it had been the day her father died. Emily's perceptive gaze never wavered. And if Jax were to ask you to be part of his future, what then? That would depend on what future he envisions, Abigail answered honestly. I won't be an obligation or a responsibility. I've found my own way here. A smile, the first Abigail had seen from her transformed Emily's face, erasing years of hardship in an instant. I think I'm going to like you, Abigail Zimmerman. Before she could respond, Jackson stirred, his eyelids fluttering open. He blinked in confusion, gaze settling first on his sister, then shifting to Abigail with an expression of disbelief that quickly melted into joy. I'm either dead or dreaming, he murmured, his voice rough with sleep and medication. The two women I love most in the world, together at my bedside. Emily rose, pressing a kiss to her brother's forehead. Not dead, just dramatic as always. I'll give you two some privacy. With a meaningful look at Abigail, she slipped from the room. Alone with Jackson, Abigail found herself suddenly shy. How are you feeling? Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo, he admitted with a weak smile. But alive. Gloriously alive. His hand reached for hers and she took it, feeling the warmth of his skin against her palm. You're really here. I thought I might have imagined you. I'm here, she confirmed, squeezing his hand gently. Marshal Braddock told me what happened. You found Emily. Jackson's eyes brightened. We did. After 3 years, she's finally free. His expression sobered. Reeves is dead. I shot him. I know, Abigail said softly. I should feel remorse, he continued, his gaze distant. Taking a life is no small thing, but all I feel is peace, like a weight has been lifted. His eyes returned to hers, suddenly intense. Does that make me a monster? Abigail shook her head firmly. No, Jackson. It makes you human. Reeves was an evil man who caused immeasurable suffering. The world is better without him in it. Relief washed over his features. I was afraid you might think less of me. Never, she assured him. I could never think less of a man who risks his life to save others, whether they're strangers on an auction block or a sister held captive for years. Jackson's grip on her hand tightened. I kept my promise. I came back. Yes, she whispered, blinking back tears. You did. His eyes searched hers, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. And now I find myself wanting to make another promise, a more permanent one. But I have so little to offer, Abigail. No home, no fortune, just a heart that belongs to you, and hands that know how to work hard. Abigail's breath caught in her throat. Are you asking what I think you're asking, Jackson Zane? A smile tugged at his lips. I'm not doing a very good job of it, am I? Flat on my back in a doctor's surgery isn't how I imagine proposing to the woman I love. You love me? The words came out as barely more than a whisper. With every fiber of my being, he confirmed. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you on that auction block, so terrified, yet still holding your head high with dignity. And each day since has only deepened those feelings. Abigail felt tears spill onto her cheeks. I love you too, Jackson. But what about Emily? She'll need you now. Emily is stronger than she looks, he replied. And she approves of you already, I can tell. We'll figure out the details together, the three of us. But I know I want you by my side, Abigail, if you'll have me. Yes, she said without hesitation, her heart fuller than she'd ever thought possible. Yes, I'll have you, Jackson Zane, for as long as we both shall live. He tugged her hand, pulling her down until her lips met his in a kiss that sealed their promise. 2 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Abigail Zimmerman became Abigail Zane in a simple ceremony in Tucson's small church. Martha Parker had insisted on making her wedding dress a creation of ivory satin and lace that made Jackson's eyes widen with wonder when he first saw her walking down the aisle on Samuel Parker's arm. Emily, fully recovered from her ordeal and blossoming in her newfound freedom, stood as Abigail's matron of honor, her smile radiant as she watched her brother pledge his life to the woman he loved. The town had turned out in force for the celebration, Marshal Braddock and his deputies mingling with merchants, ranchers, and the various friends Jackson and Abigail had made during their time in Tucson. Even Alma had made the journey from Jackson's cabin, her weathered face softening as she gave the couple her blessing in her native Apache. After the ceremony, as they danced under the stars in the town square, Jackson held Abigail close, his breath warm against her ear. Happy? He asked, though her shining eyes had already answered. Completely, she replied, resting her head against his shoulder, the one that still bore the scar from the bullet he'd taken while rescuing Emily. And you? More than I ever thought possible, he admitted. Though I'm still not sure what I did to deserve such happiness. You paid with your life, she reminded him softly, just as you promised that day in Silver Creek. Not by dying, but by living fully and bravely, in service to those who needed you. Jackson smiled, spinning her in a graceful turn before drawing her back into his embrace. And now I have a lifetime to spend with you, Mrs. Zane. A lifetime to show you every day how grateful I am that you chose me. As grateful as I am that you chose me, Abigail countered, when all you had to offer were a few silver coins and the promise of your life. Later that night, as they stood on the porch of the small house they had purchased on the outskirts of town, a house with room enough for them and for Emily, until she decided on her own path, Jackson pulled Abigail into his arms, his eyes reflecting the countless stars above. Do you know what I think about sometimes? He asked, his voice low and intimate in the quiet night. What's that? She replied, content in the circle of his embrace. I think about how close I came to not being in Silver Creek that day. How if I'd followed a different lead, taken a different trail, you might have been sold to someone else. His arms tightened around her. It terrifies me, the thought of never having met you. Abigail reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. But you were there, and you spoke those words that changed everything. I'll pay with my life if I must. And I meant them, he said solemnly. I would have died to save you that day, not knowing what a gift you would become to me. Perhaps it was fate, Abigail suggested, smiling up at him, or divine providence. Whatever force in the universe that brings two souls together who are meant to find each other. Jackson's answering smile was tender as he lowered his head to kiss her beneath the vast canopy of stars. Then I am grateful to that force, and to the silver coins that brought me the most precious treasure of all your love. They stood together on the threshold of their new home and their new life, the painful past behind them, the promise of tomorrow stretching out before them like the endless western sky, vast and beautiful and full of possibilities. For Abigail, who had once been sold for a few silver coins, and for Jackson, who had offered his life in exchange, the true value of what they had found in each other was beyond measure, a love born in desperate circumstances, but destined to flourish in the freedom of the Wild West that had both tested and blessed them. And as they closed the door on the world outside and began their first night as husband and wife, they knew with absolute certainty that this love, this partnership, this shared future was what they had both been searching for all along, without even knowing it. Not silver, not gold, but something infinitely more precious. A love worth risking everything for, and a life worth living to its fullest, together.